The mountains of Kong were totally fake, so why did they stay on maps for 100 years? Welcome back to our cartographic confessional. Last time we explored how California floated on early maps thanks to romance novels and wishful thinking. Today we're heading across the Atlantic to West Africa, where an entire mountain range lived a full, colorful life on paper, yet never existed in reality. Imagine Europe in the late 18th century. Explorers were piecing together Africa's coastline, but the vast interior remained largely blank to them. These blank spaces weren't celebrated as mysteries, they were seen as problems to solve. And, as humans often do, some cartographers solved the problem with their imaginations. In 1796, a Scottish explorer named Mungo Park was traveling along the Niger River. He kept a journal of his observations, which later became travels in the interior districts of Africa. While on his journey, Park spotted what he thought were distant mountains. Locals told him they belonged to a powerful kingdom named Kong. It's important to recognize just how fleeting this remark was. He saw something hazy on the horizon and repeated what people told him. There was no careful measurement, no detailed survey, just a traveler's note that something mountainous might lie ahead. Back in Britain, cartographer James Rennell pored over Park's account. Rennell was a respected geographer, sometimes called the father of Indian geography, and he had theories about how the Niger flowed. He believed the river must originate in a highland to the west. Park's rumored mountains fit perfectly, so when Rennell published his 1798 map of North Africa, he drew a sweeping east-west range across West Africa and labeled it the Mountains of Kong. This was not simply a random doodle, it was an attempt to support his idea that a mountain barrier separated the Niger basin from the coastal rivers. But it was still guesswork. Maps carried an aura of authority. When people saw lines on paper labeled by a respected name, they rarely asked whether those lines were based on evidence. The thought process seemed to be, if Rennell says there are mountains, who am I to argue? Once the Mountains of Kong appeared on Rennell's map, the idea spread rapidly. In 1802, Aaron Arrowsmith's popular Africa Atlas embraced them. By 1833, a French geography textbook listed the Mountains of Kong as one of Africa's 8 principal mountain chains. Cartographers across Europe copied and elaborated on each other's work. The range was said to stretch roughly 800 to 1,000 kilometers. Some called it granite, others limestone. Writers described it as lofty, barren, and even snow-capped, a curious touch considering its location just north of the equator. In the decades that followed, the description of Kong's peaks drifted southward. Elevations varied wildly in different reports from 2,500 to 14,000 feet. The more the mountains were discussed, the less grounded the descriptions became. Even popular fiction joined in. Jules Verne casually referenced the Kong Mountains in his 1886 novel Robur the Conqueror, cementing them in the public imagination. Why were people so quick to accept a mountain range no one had ever climbed? Partly because maps were viewed as scientific documents, created by professionals who presumably would not include anything without reason. Two scholars, Thomas Bassett and Philip Porter, later wrote that the enduring depiction of the Mountains of Kong illustrates the authoritative power of maps. People believe that cartographers are guided by accuracy and scientific procedure. Doubts existed, but the extraordinary authority of maps allowed the image to persist. When local traders said they had crossed the range, Europeans believed them. When other travelers failed to find it, those travelers were quietly ignored. There's another, less noble reason. These mountains offered a convenient barrier between the unfamiliar interior of Africa and its coastal colonies. As the Big Think article points out, the real town of Kong was a thriving trading center, yet mapmakers portrayed the area as an impassable obstacle. It's hard not to see in that a subtle message. No need to venture inland, trust us, there are mountains in the way. Blank spaces on maps were uncomfortable for people used to putting everything into neat categories. So when confronted with ignorance, some cartographers preferred a confident fiction over a humble blank. That's a cautionary tale as relevant to our digital era as it was in the 1800s. The Mountains of Kong didn't just sit on paper, they took on lives in travelers' tales. Some explorers claimed to have crossed them, though accounts varied wildly. Writers insisted the peaks were blue and snow-covered. One guidebook described the range as 800 kilometers long. Another claimed it was home to gold and provided the waters of the Niger, Senegal, and Gambia rivers. The more contradictory the details, the more obvious it should have been that something wasn't right. But the very act of repetition gave the myth credibility. Human beings have a tendency to see patterns where none exist. When someone expects to see mountains, every hill looks bigger. When everyone says there's a range between two rivers, you may assume you simply haven't found the right valley yet. That's part of why this fandom persisted for so long. By the late 19th century, as exploration intensified, the absence of a great mountain chain became harder to ignore. Reports trickled in from travelers who saw nothing but rolling savanna, where the maps insisted on rugged peaks. The final blow came thanks to French officer Louis Gustave Binger. Between 1887 and 1889, Binger led a meticulous expedition tracing the Niger and its tributaries. When he reached the town of Kong, he found mosques, markets and people, but no towering mountains. His report officially declared that the mountains of Kong did not exist. After Binger's findings, the range began disappearing from new maps. But myths are stubborn. A school atlas published in Vienna in 1905 still included the mountains of Kong. A 1908 report on a solar eclipse predicted that the shadow would pass over the mountains of Kong. In 1928, the range had vanished from the map in John Bartholomew's Oxford Advanced Atlas, but it still appeared in the index, because editors forgot to remove the entry. Astonishingly, a 1995 edition of Good's World Atlas included the mountains of Kong once again. It seems even modern publishers sometimes fail to fact-check their inherited templates. So what do the mountains of Kong teach us? First, they remind us that maps are human creations. They are not neutral windows on reality. They contain the assumptions, biases, and occasionally the fantasies of their makers. A beautifully printed atlas can be utterly wrong. That should inspire both humility and curiosity. Second, the story highlights our tendency to fill in gaps with confident statements rather than admitting uncertainty. It took nearly a century, and the courage of explorers like Binger, to admit that the emperor had no mountains. In our own era, we should be wary of repeating information without verifying it, especially when it comes from sources we perceive as authoritative. Finally, the saga shows that even a non-existent place can inspire real art and wonder. Contemporary photographer Jim Naughton created a series of stereoscopic images imagining what the mountains of Kong might have looked like, complete with pastel-hued peaks and exotic creatures. His whimsical take is a fitting tribute to a myth that captured the imagination of generations. The mountains of Kong never cast a shadow on the earth, but they cast a long shadow in our minds. They illustrate both the power and the peril of maps. As you scan the world today via satellites and GPS, remember that even the most precise map is only as good as the data and assumptions behind it. Always keep a healthy dose of skepticism and a sense of wonder when looking at the lines that define our world. Next time on Maps That Lied to Us, we'll dive into the sea and look for islands that never were. Some vanished beneath the waves, others never surfaced at all. Stay curious and see you then.